to blow up an Olivant. Changes. Turn and face the strain. Changes. Where's your shame? You've left us up to our next event. Time may change me. You can twist time. Strange fascination, fascinating me.
David finally stumbled across a small pub. You could still see the nameplate, Cook's, hanging at the entrance, and the building seemed to be more or less intact. He'd never been a great frequenter of pubs. There was something eerie about the stalls at the bar, standing totally empty, and the dust covering the counter and the draft beer pumps. A drink seemed like a very good idea, so David found a glass and slowly started to pour himself a pint. The thought occurred to him that he could actually sit here all day and all night drinking if he wished, without the risk of being kicked out at closing time. He sat down at the bar and said, "Cheers," aloud to himself, but then stiffened when he heard some faint sobbing noises coming from the cosy in the corner of the pub. David walked over to investigate the noise and found a pretty Chinese girl heaving her shoulders up and down as she wept uncontrollably. "Are you okay, love? What's your name?" She shook her head and said in a small voice,
"My name is Jingfol. My boyfriend's dead. My parents, nearly everyone I know has died. And of the few left alive, most have contracted a strange illness, where pieces of their skin keep falling off."
David put his arm around the girl and said comfortingly, "Shush, they'll be okay," though he wasn't convinced they would be himself. It suddenly dawned on him that Carolyn might actually be upset at the thought of never seeing him again, and he decided to go back to his old flat to see if he could find her. He told Jingfol that he would be back to the pub later, and he knew he would, though he felt guiltily superficial for so quickly falling in love under the present circumstances. His old apartment building was still standing, even though the windows had been blown out, and the building had obviously been burnt quite badly. He cautiously climbed the stairs, some of which had fallen away, and reached the entrance to his apartment. The door was open, and lying on the floor, right in front of him, was the shocking sight of Carolyn's burnt remains. Her face had not been burnt too badly, but most of her body had been consumed. Only now David realised how beautiful and exotic looking she had been, and sadly wondered why they had not been able to get on better. As he sat on the skeleton of the leather sofa, he couldn't understand why he didn't feel more upset about Carolyn, but, dwelling on how things had been recently between them, understood that their relationship had already felt quite meaningless to him for some time. A few hours later, his thoughts drifted back to Jingfol, and he felt inspired to create a song about her. In the fading light of the once snazzy sitting room, he sang wistfully,
"I stumble into town, just like a sacred cow. Visions of swastikas in my head, plans for every word. It's in the word of my eyes. My little China girl, you shouldn't mess with me."
He felt some relief after having played the song, and decided to head back to Cook's and to Jingfol before it got too dark. There remained nothing to salvage in his apartment, so he left empty-handed. As he walked through the lonely, war-torn looking streets, he hoped that Jingfol would soon trust him enough to sleep with him, and for all he knew, he and she may be the only man and woman left alive in the world, well, who didn't have pieces of flesh falling off them. With the lack of internet or any TV or radio stations, the days soon glided towards a slower pace. They tended to get up at sunrise and go to bed at sunset, their only source of light at night being an improvised gas lamp which David had managed to painstakingly put together. Being at leisure to drink the bar dry proved to be one of the very few advantages of their current bleak situation, and they couldn't find any reasonable motive to look for another habitat for the time being. Jingfo proved to be a determined and creative cook, and most days David would pilfer food from an obliging vegetable garden or come home waving a dead rabbit as a result of hunting in the woods in the nearby foothills. With no one but each other to speak to, they soon became very close, and often would not have to say a word to clearly understand each other. At night, they would huddle in the blankets in the corner of the pub, where David had first found her crying. David liked to go out in the backyard at night and watch the stars, but he sorely missed the vast and close-up view he used to attain with his prized telescope. Jingfo made David feel like a man. For years he struggled with his identity, especially sexual identity, but when he was with her, all previous doubts about his own masculinity faded into insignificance. To break the monotony of their endless solitary domestic routine, David took Jingfo for a walk one day down to the river. It was sad to see it in its present state, with bits of wood and carcasses still bobbing around on the tips of the white foam. In the same spot they were now lapping up the sunshine. He had often spent relaxing lunch breaks while thoughtfully chewing on his Subway sandwich. Now, as he watched Jingfo walk to the riverbank, fighting a way through the long reeds on the shore, the deteriorated views, combined with the putrid smell in the air, vaguely reminded David of a seedy disco scene, and how the reeds were so reminiscent of those clubgoers, almost alien vultures, who would prey and hungrily snap up a precious and untouched flower, like his Jingfo, as quickly as they could down their pints and tequila sunrises. David dreamt of trying to reach her through the crowds in just such a hot, sensual yet insipid environment, which inspired him to start singing an equally sensual song in a deep, raw and husky manner.
Put on your red shoes and dance the blues. Let's dance to the song they're playing on the radio. Let's sway while color lights up your face. Let's sway, sway through the crowd to an empty space. If you say run, I'll run with you. If you say hide, we'll hide. Because my love for you would break my heart in two. If you should fall into my arms, tremble like a flower.
Dusk was falling when they got home, and David poured them a drink from the bar in which they remained the only non-paying, though not exactly happy, customers. He was debating whether to sit out in the backyard and stargaze for a while, but Jingfo was tired, so they rolled out the mouldy-smelling blankets to settle down to sleep. But after a few minutes in the drab silence, Jingfo asked worriedly, "What was that noise?" David tried to listen intently too, but could only hear the sound of loud raindrops hitting against the old tin roof, which was strange, as he registered that there was no sign of approaching bad weather while they were out. The noise steadily increased and grew louder, until being interrupted by a sudden blood-curdling scream from Jingfo. David lit the gas lamp, only to watch in horror as a huge spider gripped Jingfo's chest. With a terrified, slow realization, his eyes scanned the room and saw these creatures that were everywhere. He quickly grabbed an old copper beer mug, which once might have been admired by the punters as an ornament, and tried to knock the spider off Jingfo, but the more David struck it, the more it seemed to stick and cling. In disgust, he noted it had glowing, black, beetle-like skin, and was at least the size of a dinner plate. As he wasn't having any luck with discouraging the spider from embracing Jingfor's adored breast, he grabbed his guitar, which made a loud strumming noise as he hit it, and for some reason this had the effect of making the slimy beast squeal and squiggle sideways and quickly away. Jingfor was bleeding profusely, and David led her out into the backyard to disinfect the wounds with alcohol. David remembered that insects hated the smell of bleach. He knew the shed was full of the stuff, so he grabbed 2 large cans and started hurriedly dousing the inside of the premises. To his relief, all the spiders instantly scurried off and disappeared until they were left alone in silence, only interrupted by intermittent sobs of pain and a nauseating, overpowering stench of bleach. David poured some whiskey down Jingfor's throat. Even though he knew she didn't drink alcohol, he also knew she would never be able to cope with the physical pain she was in that night without some foreign help. He covered Jingfor's unconscious body in wraps and carried her out of the cold and into the stinking but now sterilised pub before gently laying her on the floor and kissing her forehead. He wished she could open her eyes, but she was far too injured and had lost far too much blood during the spider attack. David resolved that when she was able to open those eyes, he would write a song about them and his love for her, which would start with the words, "There's such a sad love deep in your eyes."
A kind of pale jewel, open and closed within your eyes. I'll place the sky within your eyes. There's such a fooled heart beating so fast in search of new dreams. A love that will last within your heart. I'll place the moon within your heart. As the pain sweeps through, makes no sense for you. Every thrill is gone, wasn't too much fun at all. But I'll be there for you as the world falls down.
While Jingfor was resting, David felt at loose ends and wandered around the pub looking at the pictures of barges on the wall and the old family photographs which must have belonged to the original pub owner. Everyone's expression in the photo was so serious. Perhaps there wasn't much to smile about then. But the air of innocence emanating from their faces was not something you would come across much nowadays. Not that there were any faces around to study on a daily basis now. And David wondered at what point in the future he'd be able to take up his favourite hobbies of people watching again. As he turned towards the bar, David got the fright of his life. Hovering in the air above the counter were 2 tiny figures, with almost skeletal bodies and big heads that were almost fully encompassed by their large, looming black eyes, which had no pupils or whites in them. As he observed them in silent awe, one of the beings lifted his finger, from which a white beam of light shone towards David's forehead. Though they didn't speak a word, David could hear clearly in his mind what they were saying. In his head, he heard them say, "Good day, friend. We are the Starmen, and are here to rescue you." David felt almost ashamed that they could hear his thoughts as he muttered, "What the fuck?" to himself. "You have opened your pineal gland to see the truth, and we will return to do the same thing with Jingfor when she recovers." David knew exactly what was going on, but had no control over it whatsoever. And he could see the ghosts of punters getting up and down in the pub. A couple were arguing, and the woman was looking somewhat the worse for wear. David would have liked to go over and tap her on the shoulder to kindly advise her that perhaps she ought to ease up on the vodka In horror, he noticed that he himself had transformed into a skeleton as he fearfully tried to grip the bones on his left arm with his right hand. As the back door of the pub opened itself onto the yard, David found himself in front of a tall pyramid which emitted a very faint violet light. Before he knew where he was standing inside the middle of the pyramid. The inside seemed to glow faintly in a type of beige-coloured slime, intermittently embedded with what looked like huge cobwebs. They were also caked in the same sort of gunge. David could see only the heads of various starmen watching him as though he were walking to a clearing in a wood, and his onlookers were dotted in various points, observing him from the trees. One of the starmen asked, "Are you ready, our boy?" But David was still in trance and couldn't do more than make a paralysed nod. A strong beam of violet light appeared from the tip of the pyramid and encompassed the spot where David was standing. Against his will, it started pulling him upwards physically. His body started being twisted and contorted around the inside of the building. Every time he touched against a wall, the starman's face would appear and speak to him harshly. The first voice said, "You're a danger to society, David, and you know it." Another, "Who do you think you are?" And as he spun towards the top of the structure, one said, "We will show you who you really are." David suddenly felt a bolt of energy surge through his body, and on hitting against the wall again, heard them cry in unison, "David, you are Ziggy!" He was suddenly plummeting to the ground. He hurt his leg quite badly, but didn't mind because he actually felt radiant and more emancipated and at peace than he'd ever felt in his entire life. He noted that he was wearing a light blue, lycra glittery suit, and the pure white light was coming from every pore of his skin, which was a skeleton no more. Even his hand looked whiter than their usual paleness and glowed with powerful energy. He wondered how the starman could have known what his true identity really was. Inside his head he heard them loudly saying, "It's time to go, Ziggy. We will be back to format you soon." Seconds later, David found himself standing in the backyard, and any sign of that pyramid had been there had completely vanished. Disappointingly, too, he was also back in his scrubby everyday clothes. But he knew he had come into contact with his true self, and that he really was Ziggy. When he got back inside, he instantly picked up his guitar and started strumming a song. Ziggy rarely sang, screwed up eyes and screwed down hairdo, like some cat from Japan.
He could lick 'em by smiling, he could leave 'em to hang. They came on so loaded, man, well hung in snow-white tan. So where were the spiders while the fly tried to break our bones? Well, just the fear like to guide us. So we bitched about his bands and should we crunch his sweet hands.
While David was crafting his masterpiece, he heard Jingful stir and struggle to get up. She said she was feeling a lot better now, but would need David to look after her. He had to remind himself that she wasn't a starman, so conversation would be necessary. David called over the lounge to the pub, which was no longer providing hospitality to any drinking, argumentative ghosts. I'll be with you in a minute, love. I'm just working on a cool song." "What did you say?" Jingful replied in disbelief, with her hands on her hips. But David was so engrossed in his lyrics writing that he failed to catch the anger in her tone.
"I cannot believe you're writing songs when I'm almost dying here."
David stopped strumming the guitar and calmly tried to explain that he wasn't doing a thing to spite her, but that he was a musician. You had to get the words down at once when you're blessed with inspiration, as otherwise they would disappear from your mind and be lost forever. But Jingfo wasn't having any of it. She kept insisting that it was David's main priority to take care of her at this time, and that it was an uncaring, superficial git writing songs. She was unfortunately rubbing him up very much the wrong way, as one thing David couldn't stand was women who kept insisting on their point of view when they were so obviously wrong. As the argument escalated and his blood pressure rose, David finally snapped. "Oh, shut up, you stupid bitch!" Jingfo looked so completely outraged it would have been easy to imagine black smoke coming out of her ears. She strode decisively towards the pub door, swinging it carelessly open while declaring she hoped he would be happy and that the lifeless old guitar would be a fine lot of comfort to him when she was gone. David tutted and turned his back to her. At that moment he didn't care where she'd gone, as long as she was no longer there to bother him. He reasoned she would have to return sooner or later. She'd nowhere else to go.
Changes. Don't tell them to grow up.